They promised the world the greatest sporting event in human history. They delivered empty seats. And not just a few scattered gaps here and there at a minor group stage match nobody cared about. We are talking about thousands upon thousands of unsold tickets, hollow sections in stadiums that were supposed to represent the pinnacle of global football, and a governing body forced to slash its own prices in secret in the dead of night without a single press conference, without a single apology, just days before the biggest tournament on the planet was due to kick off. This is the story of how FIFA turned the most anticipated World Cup in history into a ticketing catastrophe that will define the organization's reputation for years to come. And the numbers behind this disaster are even more shocking than the images. 2 days before the opening match in Mexico City, approximately 180,000 tickets were sitting unsold across FIFA's official resale portals. Let that figure sink in. 180,000 empty seats waiting to be filled at a tournament FIFA's own president described as generating demand 10 times greater than any previous World Cup. For the opening fixture involving the host nation of the United States, one of the most anticipated matches of the entire group stage, over 4,000 tickets were still available through official channels the night before kickoff. For Iran's group matches, around 16,000 seats remained unsold. The numbers told a story that no official statement could contradict. This did not happen by accident. It was the predictable consequence of a commercial strategy that prioritized extraction over access, profit over passion, and quarterly revenue over the 100-year-old soul of the game. If you want to understand everything that is happening behind the scenes at this World Cup, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications. What comes next reveals just how deep this crisis actually goes. To understand the full scale of the collapse, you need to go back to the promise that was made 8 years ago. When the United States, Canada, and Mexico submitted their joint bid to host this tournament, they made a specific commitment to the world's football community. A seat at the final, they said, would cost a maximum of $1,550. That was the pledge. That was what they put in writing. That was the number that helped convince FIFA to award them the hosting rights for the biggest football tournament in history. By April of this year, the cheapest standard ticket for the final had reached $5,785. The most expensive seats hit $10,990, and then those prices tripled again. The same seat that was promised at $1,550 was being listed at figures that would bankrupt an ordinary family who simply wanted to watch their national team play in the biggest game on earth. A promise was made, it was broken, and broken spectacularly. The mechanism behind this betrayal has a name that sounds technical and harmless: dynamic pricing. FIFA introduced it to this World Cup for the first time, insisting it was a modern, sophisticated approach to ticket distribution. The concept itself is familiar to anyone who has ever booked a flight and watched the price change every time they refresh the page. Prices rise when demand is high. Prices fall when demand drops. The algorithm decides. No human accountability, no fixed commitment, no certainty for the fan who budgeted months in advance, saved their annual leave, booked their flights, arranged childcare, and then sat down at their computer to discover the ticket they were expecting to pay $400 for was now listed at $4,000. Prices went up for 90 of the tournament's 104 matches. Not some of them, 90 of them. If you are watching this and you feel the anger that millions of football supporters around the world have been feeling for months, subscribe to the channel, because what FIFA did next tells you everything you need to know about how this organization operates. When the backlash began, and it began immediately, loudly, and globally, FIFA's response followed a pattern that has become disturbingly familiar. First, denial. President Gianni Infantino stood before the cameras and told the world that demand for this tournament was unlike anything football had ever seen. 500 million ticket requests, he claimed, demand 10 times greater than any previous edition. The tournament was a triumph. The system was working. There was nothing to worry about.
Then reality arrived, in the form of images that circled the planet in hours. During the match between South Korea and Czechia at the Estadio Akron in Guadalajara, television cameras broadcast something that contradicted every word the president had spoken. Row after row of empty red seats, entire sections with nobody in them. The East Stand, the pitchside VIP areas, the premium sections, visibly, undeniably hollow. The official attendance figure said the ground was practically full. The pictures said something else entirely. And in the age of global broadcasting and social media, pictures win every time. FIFA's explanation for the empty seats was staggering in its audacity. The gaps, the organization suggested, were caused by supporters who were in the concourses and corridors at the time. Fans in the hallways. That was the official response to images of gaping holes in a World Cup stadium that had been seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world. Not the pricing model, not the algorithm, not the broken promise. Fans in the hallways. But that explanation lasted approximately as long as it took journalists to do the basic arithmetic. Tickets in the most heavily affected areas of that stadium were priced between $400 and $5,000. Real supporters, the ones who follow their countries across continents, who paint their faces and learn the songs and pass the tradition down to their children, do not pay $5,000 to spend the match standing in a corridor. What happened next would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. The Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey launched formal legal investigations into FIFA, accusing the governing body of confusing fans and artificially inflating ticket prices. Think about what that means in practical terms. The host nation's own law enforcement authorities filed formal actions against the organization running its most prestigious sporting event. Not against a ticket tout, not against a scalping operation, against FIFA itself, on American soil at the American World Cup. And quietly, with no press conference, no statement, and no acknowledgement of any wrongdoing whatsoever, FIFA began to act. In early June, just days before the tournament opened, the governing body slashed prices across all 104 matches. Simultaneously, it released 70% of the hotel rooms it had block booked across host cities, rooms that had been reserved for commercial partners and hospitality packages at a time when ordinary supporters were being told availability was limited. Rooms that had been sitting empty while fans in those cities were paying hotel rates of up to $500 a night in places like Guadalajara, where rooms that had been averaging $90 a year earlier were now listed at over $500. Ticketing alone generated $3 billion for FIFA from this tournament. That figure represents 27% of total World Cup revenue, a share that dwarfs anything the organization has taken from ticket sales in any previous edition. For context, across the 30 years before this tournament, World Cup ticket prices had remained broadly stable when adjusted for inflation. The dynamic pricing model did not evolve naturally from market forces. It was a deliberate strategic decision to extract the maximum possible revenue from the single biggest football audience the sport has ever assembled. And the people who paid the price for that decision were the supporters. UEFA, watching from across the Atlantic, chose to respond not with words, but with action. The European governing body announced that Euro 2028 would cap ticket prices with nearly half of all seats available for under €70. The contrast with FIFA's approach could not have been drawn more sharply. One organization looked at the empty seats in Guadalajara and decided to change course entirely. The other told the world that fans were in the hallways. The fan groups that had been warning about this for years were equally direct. Football supporters Europe had called the pricing strategy extortionate months before the tournament began. Their representatives described the situation in language that left no room for diplomatic interpretation. This was, they said, a handful of people trying to extract the maximum possible money from a tournament that belongs to everyone. And they warned, with precision that has now been vindicated entirely, that this approach was putting the fundamental nature of the World Cup at risk. A football stadium without real fans is not a sporting event. It is a television set. The atmosphere, the noise, the color, the spontaneous roar that travels through broadcast signals into living rooms on every continent, all of it depends entirely on the presence of supporters who genuinely care about the result. Corporate guests in hospitality suites do not produce that noise. Empty seats produce silence, and silence at a World Cup is not just a commercial embarrassment, it is the death of something that cannot be bought back once it is gone. Subscribe to the channel if this story matters to you, because the consequences of what FIFA has done here are going to be felt long after the final whistle at MetLife Stadium. Here is the deeper question that this ticket scandal forces football to confront. FIFA set out to make this the richest World Cup in history, and by the measure of total revenue, it will almost certainly succeed. The governing body will pocket billions. The commercial partners will be satisfied. The broadcast deals will be honored. On a spreadsheet, the 2026 World Cup will look like a triumph. But a World Cup is not a spreadsheet. It is a moment that arrives once every 4 years and asks the entire planet to stop what it is doing and share something together. That shared experience has a value that cannot be quantified in dollars, and it depends entirely on people who could not afford $5,000 for a ticket being able to find their way into a stadium anyway. The grandmother in Senegal who saved for a decade to watch her country play. The working family from Manchester who built their summer holiday around a single group stage match. The young supporter from Colombia for whom the World Cup is not a consumer experience, but a once-in-a-lifetime connection to something larger than themselves. FIFA looked at those people and decided they were less important than the algorithm. The empty seats at this World Cup are not just bad optics, they are a warning that the sport's governing body ignored, dismissed, and then tried to explain away with a story about fans in the hallways. A warning that supporters' organizations delivered months in advance. A warning that the attorneys general of 2 American states took seriously enough to launch formal investigations. A warning that UEFA heard clearly enough to change direction entirely for their own tournament. The question that football now has to answer is whether FIFA heard it too, or whether the next World Cup, and the one after that, will be remembered not for the goals and the drama and the joy that this sport has always delivered, but for the rows of empty seats that told the world exactly what the game's most powerful organization had decided their supporters were worth.